Good evening, parents and carers. I hope you all had a wonderful May half term. It is quite crazy to think that we are coming to the end of our webinar series for this academic year, but we have got a few more, and I'm delighted with the speaker we have this evening, a returning community member that we feel now she's part of our furniture at Forest. Before we start, hopefully we'll have no technical difficulties, but if we do, please do bear with us and be patient. Just to give you a heads up, you will get your usual notification, but on Wednesday, the 12th of June, which is our next webinar, we will welcome back James Schoen, who will be repeating his webinar from last year based on the feedback, and that will all be about inflating balloons of self-belief. And hopefully we'll have some new members of our community, our new year 6 going into year 7 parents and carers joining us for that webinar as well. So without further ado, I just want to remind everyone, or those that are new to joining the webinar series, regarding our speaker this evening, who, as I said, it's a true honour to be in her presence, even online, and she has become a firm favourite with colleagues at Forest and with myself due to her expertise and an amazing signposting and support that she provides and the team provide at the Wellbeing Hub. And you all have your access details. If you do need any further information about the Wellbeing Hub, please do refer to your core team or to myself, and we can ensure that we remind you of your login details. But it's a wonderful resource, and it's something that we use as a pastoral core team daily in terms of signposting. And I'm so grateful to Alicia and her team. So Alicia is passionate about providing evidence-based advice to parents and carers, teachers, and all those looking after children and young people, so they can really be proactive in supporting the mental health and well-being of those in their care. And we say at Forest is all about triangulation of support, and we're really grateful for your support as parents and carers. But the magic really happens when we work together with the young people at the centre of all our decision making, and the Wellbeing Hub, and Alicia is the founder, they promote that and they do that. So Alicia also works directly with children, young people, empowering them to look after their mental health and well-being, and she draws on the latest research from psychotherapy, psychology, neuroscience, along with her experience of working as an adolescent therapist. So all of this information is well informed and well researched. She is also a BACP accredited therapist, parenting expert, sought after keynote speaker, member of the all-party parliamentary group for Fit and Healthy Childhood, an author and a mother. So I'm slightly jealous and feel slightly not equipped compared to what she is doing. She is a role model there. She's regularly sought for her expert opinion by the media. And having worked with schools across the UK for more than a decade, and I know it's increasing, delivering webinars, talks and workshops to parents, carers, staff and pupils, she created in 2020 the Wellbeing Hub that we are very proud to be part of and promote and use. This award-winning platform provides schools with a whole school proactive approach to supporting the mental health and well-being of young people, now in over 180 schools. I'm sure it's more now, impacting over 100,000 pupils. And when I hear that, it makes me feel so proud, especially with what our young people are having to navigate. So I am so grateful once again for all that she does and the team at the Wellbeing Hub. So I'm going to hand over to Alicia now. And without further ado, I hope you all have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Natasha. That was quite the intro. I feel like I've got a lot to live up to, but it's really gorgeous to be with you. We love working with Forest. Yes, the numbers have gone up. I think we're at 220 schools and 130,000 pupils, so things are growing. But today we are talking about buttons and boundaries and managing challenging behaviour, because even the best behaved children can resort to difficult or challenging behaviour at times. And when that becomes a feature of everyday life, it becomes really hard for us as parents. I'm a parent as well, although they're pretty grown up these days, as caregivers, as teachers, to remain calm and confident and consistent. So in this talk, we're going to explore some of the common triggers that drive that challenging behaviour. We're going to discuss some strategies that we as parents can adopt to minimise drama and conflict, because the truth is that how we react when their behaviour becomes challenging will determine whether those moments are opportunities for growth and learning, or whether they become experiences that ultimately shut down and shame. We have got the chat is open, the comments are open. You're more than welcome to post in any questions that you might have. We'll do a Q&A at the end, and feel free to ask absolutely anything at all. But let's begin by just defining challenging behaviour, because of course, different families have different expectations about what behaviour is or is not acceptable. But in common, when we're looking at it, the behaviours that are commonly deemed to be challenging are come under a few categories. So defiance, that first one, kind of ignoring instructions, refusing to cooperate, that kind of, well, I'm not doing it and you can't make me, so what are you going to do about it? Which is probably true by the time they get to kind of middle adolescence. So that's defiance. Number two tends to be more among younger ones, but fussiness, refusing to eat certain foods, refusing to participate in certain activities, insisting on kind of wearing, summer clothes in winter and winter clothes in summer, and all of that kind of thing. Number three is when we get violent, so that lashing out, kicking, hitting, biting, pushing others. And the last one was when we see really extreme anger when they're frustrated. So those are the most common ones that, if you ask a lot of parents, that's the list they tend to come up with as what they find particularly challenging to deal with. And we need to understand the common triggers. So the common triggers for it all are, oops, I've just clicked the wrong button, are as follows. There you go, common triggers for challenging behaviour. I don't think any of us are at our best when we're feeling unwell. Too much screen time, there seems to be a kind of optimum amount, especially for things like the gaming, around about 40 to 45 minutes. And it's often after that parents report that the young people become much, much more angry and difficult when they come up. And it's partly about really how much cortisol has been rushing around for how long. So if we can limit screen sessions to below 45 minutes and make sure that it's just part of a much bigger picture, then we can make sure we don't have too much screen time that's going to send them into that challenging behaviour. Not having the social skills to be able to communicate their wants and needs to us as adults can be deeply frustrating and can lead to kind of lashing out behaviour. When we're stressed, when we're worried, when we're frightened, when we're feeling overwhelmed, all of those can be triggers. Hunger, poor diet, hangry. I don't know about if you and your family get hangry. We certainly have it in ours. Needing attention. I hate that expression, attention. They're attention seeking. Actually, children who seek attention do so because they need it. So they need attention, and the behaviour is likely to go somewhat adrift if they don't get it. Sometimes it's to avoid doing something. Sometimes it's around neurodiversity. Children can exhibit much more challenging behaviour because they're trying to make sense of and to cope with their environment, and that's really, really difficult. Mental health issues, so things like anxiety and depression. If we go back to that idea of fussiness, kind of cutting out entire food groups, eating disorders, all of those can be result in challenging behaviour. And then not having their developmental needs met. So, for example, toddlers and teenagers both need to be allowed to be more independent, and if they're not allowed to explore and experiment and push the boundaries a little bit, then it tends to come out in behavior. So you can see, I mean, those are just the most common ones, but there's lots and lots of reasons why a child or a young person might be triggered. But when we look at that list, you can see that actually underneath that challenging behavior, there is always, always, always some form of unmet emotional or physical need. And if we can address the need rather than focusing on the behavior, we can expect the behavior to change. And as it is true for our children, so it is true for us. When we feel okay, we act okay. When we're there and we're exhausted and we're overwhelmed and we're stressed or we're feeling unwell, or any of the other things in that list, we are much more likely to react unhelpfully when our children act out. We are also more likely to lose our calm if it's a recurring drama. So, for example, trying to get them off their screens. If it's something that happens day in, day out, we're much more likely to be triggered. Or the other thing that often triggers us, if it's one of our buttons. And when you're trying to think what your buttons are, it's that thing that kind of sends you from calm to feeling completely out of control in about 2 nanoseconds. So for me, it's always first and foremost, if I'm running late. My buttons get pushed if I'm running late. If you've got a piece of paper at home, just kind of scribble this out, because it's a really, really useful exercise to do for understanding what pushes each of our buttons. Because if you understand what pushes somebody's buttons and you carry on doing it, what does that say? It's also really brilliant if you've got more than one child and there's lots of sibling rivalry. Actually, them understanding what pushes each other's buttons is really, really helpful for minimizing drama. And in the school setting, again, where you've got issues amongst friendships groups, actually getting them to complete these button sheets can be really helpful. So give it a go. And for you, maybe trying to focus on what pushes your buttons, what your kids do that pushes your buttons. So for me, my buttons get pushed if I'm running late, but also if I think my kids are being ungrateful. That can send me from 0 to 100 in 2 nanoseconds. And young and old, we all have buttons. Now, what pushes our buttons is likely to be different for each of us. So what pushes my buttons wouldn't necessarily push your buttons, and might not push our children's buttons. We all have different buttons. So just take a minute and just think about what pushes your buttons. I think the chat's working, is it, Natasha?
Yeah, it's all working okay. Just if they just use the comments on YouTube.
Okay, brilliant. So in the comments box, if you felt like sharing something that really pushes your buttons, because often we have similar things. So as I say, for me, it's running late, or if I think they're being ungrateful. So I'll leave it as an open thing. If you want to do it, shove in the comments box something that pushes your buttons. And also think about, what pushes your child or your children's buttons, because we have to have this kind of self-awareness. We understand our buttons and our triggers, we can start to do things very differently, and that might just mean that we can pull ourselves back to the green zone, which might means that we can avoid that shouting, that blaming, the shaming that we might end up resorting to when our children's behavior is challenging. Understanding what pushes our children's buttons means that we can reduce the chance of them ending up in that red zone. And that really matters, because if their behavior deteriorates, very often ours follows suit. And if you're dealing with a teenager who's yelling and shouting and swearing at you, it can be quite difficult to sort of remain in that green zone where we're feeling okay, I can cope with this, I don't have to be, I'm all right. We just tend to follow them often, and then the whole volume escalates and everything gets worse and worse. So let's kind of look at what is actually happening when our buttons get pushed. So it's all happening up in your brain. And our brain is on the top of our brain up here. We have an area called the thalamus, and the region is the region of the brain which is, it's kind of like the relay center, but it's also the part that is constantly looking out for opportunities and for threats. And Natasha's going to play the video for us. But when the thalamus detects, say for example, a threat, smoke, it's got to make a decision. Is this a piece of toast burning, or is it the house burning down? Now, if it thinks it's a piece of toast burning, then it allows the prefrontal cortex, which are these frontal lobes here, to stay in charge. And we go in and we switch off the toaster, and we open the window, and we turn off the alarm, and we get on with our day. If, on the other hand, it thinks, this is definitely the house about to burn down, it flings the prefrontal cortex offline. So we become what we call dysregulated. Prefrontal cortex flips, you flip your lid, and the button, this bit here, is the amygdala, which is the brain's panic button. The amygdala gets pushed, it sends a message down our brainstem through to our adrenal glands, which sit in our just above our kidneys. They start pumping out adrenaline, noradrenaline, cortisol, and we are off and running in fight, flight, or freeze. Now, in this next video, you can see the fight, flight, or freeze. It can be really, really useful. Natasha, are you able to play the video?
Yeah. Would you like the second one, or
just go for this one? This is
okay,
fine.
perfect.
There you go. So we are very, very rarely in those kind of life or death situations. That's what the fight or flight response exists for. It is to get us out of imminent danger. And we don't, as I say, we don't very often have to run for our lives or physically fight, but the response is about survival. So, if we've learned to read a situation as dangerous, or if we have experienced danger in the past, that information gets stored in the memory part of the brain, the hippocampus, and anything that reminds us of that original time is going to press the panic button again. So what pushes our panic button is determined by our previous experiences. It's like having this kind of library of all our previous experiences, and our brain is constantly making predictions based on those experiences. So, for example, if you've got a child who's brought up by parents who are highly volatile and unpredictable, they are likely to be triggered by anybody else who acts in a similar way. And when we go into that fight, flight, or freeze mode, it's also flop. So you've got fight, flight, freeze, flop, or fawn. There's actually 5 Fs. Can't hardly say it. We are operating from our limbic brain. So we are dysregulated. The lid's up, we're dysregulated. We can't really regulate or manage our emotional responses very effectively, because that prefrontal cortex, which we use to calm ourselves down, is temporarily offline. And, emotion management or self-regulation, or whatever you want to call it, that ability to modify or control our thoughts, emotions, actions, and words is a really, really sophisticated skill, and it takes time to develop it. It's something that we learn from the adults in our lives, and ideally we learn it young, from our parents, through a process known as co-regulation. If you think about tiny babies and how they make you feel, Have you ever been in a supermarket where you see a really, really distressed baby and you're all parents? Some of you probably will have wanted to help. Some of you might remember that kind of hideous sense of panic that you got when you were in the same situation when they were little. Some of you might even have felt quite annoyed, although I suspect if you kind of drill down into that feeling of annoyance, it's because you want the mum or the dad to soothe it. In other words, that baby's distress distresses you and you want someone to make it stop. Whatever your response, the chances are that you will have been unable to concentrate fully on your shopping trolley until that baby is either calmed or removed. And babies experience really extreme and intense emotions with very, very few shades of grey. And they can't really do anything about those emotions other than try to communicate them to their caregivers. Now, if they have caregivers who are sensitive, who are attuned, who are able to accept, understand, and respond to those emotional states, they end up being calm. So if you see this diagram here, the baby cries. At first, the parent responds slightly anxious, because especially when they're that tiny, most of us haven't got a clue what we're doing, certainly with the first one. But if we can calm ourselves down because we've learned how to self-regulate, then we can be calm and we can be available for that baby. And if that's generally how a parent or carer responds, the child learns to internalize what's being modeled for them until eventually the point comes when they can do it for themselves. They can regulate their own emotions, they can take over. But it's definitely not going to happen before the age of 5, and it's still difficult, really. We don't really expect them to get it up until about the age of 10. And I'm sure you will all know older ones and even adults who still haven't mastered that self-regulation. It's really sophisticated. So in this next video, which Natasha's just about to play for us, you can see this process of regulation, dysregulation, co-regulation, and again, regulation at the end. So thank you, Natasha.
Babies this young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This is something that we started studying 30, 40 years ago, when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. In the still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby, who's about a year of age.
I'm my girl. Oh.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her.
Yeah.
This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this. And then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, "Come on, why aren't we doing this?" Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions, they turn away, they feel the stress of it. They actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
Okay. I'm here. And what are you doing? Oh, yes. Oh, what a big girl.
It's a little like the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is that normal stuff that goes on, that we all do with our kids. The bad is when something bad happens, but the infant can overcome it. After all, when you stop the still face, the mother and the baby start to play again. The ugly is when you don't give the child any chance to get back to the good. There's no reparation, and they're stuck in that really ugly situation.
So there you go. I don't know what that was like for you to watch. It still makes me feel quite upset, actually. But if you watch, there were so many different tactics that baby employed to try and get back the attention of her mum. And then how quickly she calmed down once the mum re-engaged. And as he says, the good and the occasional bad are okay. It's the ugly we really, really want to avoid, because when children don't experience co-regulation, they can't develop self-regulation. And co-regulation is kind of like lending them our prefrontal cortex whilst theirs is kind of temporarily offline. So you could think of it a little bit like hotspotting your computer to your phone when the internet's down. But if we're also offline, then we can't be available, so we can't help them. And even older children, will still need from time to time, all of us need from time to time, somebody to help us through co-regulation to self-regulate. So with awareness comes choice. So going back to that idea of the buttons sheet, what do you feel in your body when your buttons get pushed? For me, I always get butterflies in my stomach. I quite often have tense shoulders. I've got tense shoulders today, actually, because I've been doing a talk at a conference, which I always find more nerve-wracking. My heart is all racing, because when we're in fight, flight, or freeze, all of this stuff is going on. Now, if you think about, for the one I was pulled out of here is that eyes becoming unfocused. Because, for example, we're in the middle of exam season at the moment. If you've got a young one who goes into this fight, flight, or freeze mode in the middle of exam, their pupils dilate. The minute your pupils dilate, it becomes much, much more difficult to see what's going on around you. Much more difficult to read small print, because actually your pupils dilated to see where the danger is coming from. So all of this stuff is going on, and I think we've become a bit like these kind of walking brains. It's like our heads have been chopped off and we're not listening to the feedback that our bodies give us, and it gives us huge amounts of sensory feedback. So really understanding how you react, how you experience stress, and helping young people to be able to work out how they experience stress is giving them information that they can use, which ultimately will help them with self-regulation. It's also really important to understand how somebody is going to react. So for me, if I'm running late, chances I'm going to end up driving like a lunatic. And if my kids are being ungrateful, then the chances I'm going to get really cross. Why? Because we all respond differently in different situations. Some of us shut down, some of us go into pleasing others mode, some of us shout, some of us scream, some of us argue, some of us sulk. And more often not than underneath all that behavior is fear. What's my fear? My fear of being late is because when I was 8 at school, Mrs. Harvey, who was the headmistress, if you were late going into school, she'd be standing on the steps with this meter-long ruler and you used to get whacked as you went past. And that was really, really frightening. So that fear that I was going to get into trouble. If it's when I'm parenting and they're being ungrateful, it's much more likely to be around that fear of not being a good enough parent, that fear for some of us of losing control. So one of the things that I think is always quite useful when we're thinking about our triggers and buttons as parents is thinking, in that moment, how old do you feel? So for me, being late, I literally feel 8. I'm pinging off, Mrs. Harvey's going to be there, I'm going to get whacked. This is a really dangerous situation. And of course, now I'm older and I've got lots more experience, and I can say to myself, it's okay, Alicia. Mrs. Harvey is actually dead. She's not going to be standing on the doorstep with a ruler. You are okay. But I have to be able, it's really hard. In the first instant, I'm off and running. I then have to be able to use my brain to calm myself down. If you're thinking, gosh, when my button gets pushed, I literally open my mouth and my mum or my dad comes out. then what's happening with you is you're rubber banding back. We call it rubber banding, so we kind of go back in terms of when it first happened. So when I said how our current, our brain is making predictions on our history, go back to that first time, and we either try and resolve the problem as we did as young children, or we'll try and resolve it as we saw the adults around us trying to resolve it. So, for example, when I was little, my mum had the monopoly on anger. So if she got angry, there's no way any of us went back at her angry. I can ping straight back to being about 5, and the tactic I then use would be just to go really quiet, because if you went quiet, then she used to come down more quickly. When I get angry because I think that they have been ungrateful, that's when I go into, I can literally open my mouth and I can hear my mum coming out. I do so much for you. Why can't you just do this one little thing for me? What is the matter with you? You're so spoiled, blah, 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 blah. But it usually comes from that place of fear. And I think when our buttons are pushed, when that lid is up, we've got to remember that rational thinking becomes impossible. We are just going to deal with it in those time-worn patterns of behavior, which ultimately are going to have a pretty unhelpful outcome. So if you've got something, if there's behavior going on in your house that is causing consistent and regular drama, we need to deal with it, because if we're just getting triggered and going into that reactive response all the time, it ends up trashing relationships, and it's not good for any of us. So the first thing I think we need is to identify what is it that pushes buttons. The second thing is we need to go through a process, and the process that I've come up with looks like this. So first and foremost, you've got to close the lid. And certainly, when I've been around that, I've certainly been times when I said to them that right now I can't talk about this, because if I do, I'm going to end up losing the plot, and I know that I will end up saying something that I really, really regret. I'm just going to take myself off and have a bit of a walk. So you're modeling for them that actually we don't just react when our buttons get pushed. We take responsibility by taking ourselves out of the equation for a bit. And I'll say to them, I'm not sulking, I just need some space. And then once I've got myself together, then we can have a look at what's really going on. So you need to close the lid. Don't go in problem solving with your lid up. If you can see their lid is up, do not go into problem solving. If you're co-parenting and you can see your partner's lid is up but your lid is down, give them a way of kind of moving away. You know what, I can see you're really triggered right now. Do you want me to just deal with this? Okay, so you've got to make sure that the lids are down before you start to do this problem solving. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we need to state the problem and its impact. When you go out and you tell me that you're going to be back at 9 and then you don't come back till 10:30, I really worry about you. And it's not okay. What's going on for you? That's the reflective listening bit. Well, I just go out and then I'm with my friends and I just kind of lose track of time. So, okay, so it's not that you're trying to kind of get this wrong. It's literally because you're losing track of time. Okay, all right, I get it. How can we solve the problem? Do we need a boundary? Well, the boundary actually needs to be that, we have said your curfew is 9:30 or whatever it is. And, I'm happy to work with you to get a plan in place so you don't end up breaking it. But it does have to be a boundary because it keeps happening. So how do we set boundaries, and do we need consequences? How do you feel about boundaries and consequences? Most people, when you talk to them about boundaries and consequences, they're like, oh yeah, I kind of know I need them, but we're a bit inconsistent, and we'll do it, and then we forget what we've said, and or I've got very strict boundaries and my other half doesn't. There's lots and lots of stuff that goes on around boundaries and consequences. But teenagers particularly do need some, not very many. You don't want to be setting too many, otherwise you'll be chasing your tail around trying to sort them out. but you need a boundary where there is persistent, consistent, repetitive, poor or unhelpful behavior. So let's have a look at how we might go about setting boundaries. First and foremost, never, ever, ever set boundaries in the heat of the moment. When we set boundaries in the heat of the moment, we end up saying things like, that's it, you're not coming on holiday with us, or Christmas is cancelled, and we just make ourselves completely ridiculous because we're not going to follow through, frankly, on our boundary. So never ever set boundaries in the heat of the moment. Secondly, make sure that you and your other half, if you're co-parenting, can work together. Now, that does not mean that you have to agree with one another. So I did a workshop, it was a long time ago now actually, and I had a couple there. They could not have been more different. Like, he was Mr. Neat Freak, 3-piece suit, tie, you name it, absolutely immaculately dressed. And she was really, really kind of crazy colours and, you know, tats and dyed hair and really, really wild. And they said, oh, Alicia, we have a recurring problem. And I said, what's that? And she said, well, we've only got one daughter and she's 12. And every time my husband comes home, he goes stomping up the stairs. He goes into her room. He comes out. He gets angry because her room's a complete and utter mess. And so I said, okay. And she said, I just really feel like our daughter's getting caught in the middle of us, because I really don't mind that much about the bedroom, and I really don't think it's that messy. And usually I've told her to go and sort of tidy it up a bit before he comes back anyway. So it just seems really unnecessary. So I said, okay, so on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is this bedroom to you? And he said, Alicia, for me, it's a 10. And she said, Alicia, for me, it's not even a 1. So I said, okay, so the chances of you meeting at a 5, and this is where it got really awkward, because he said, Alicia, if you think I am lowering my standards to her slutty ones, you can bloody well think again. And I was like, oh, okay. Right. You don't agree at all. You can't agree at all. You have a very authoritarian approach to this. You have a very hands-off approach to this, but your child is getting caught between the two of you not being able to work together. You don't have to agree, but you do have to be able to work together. So, which one of you is going to be in charge of this particular boundary? And she said, well, I'm not, because I really, really don't care about it. And he said, well, I will. And I thought, yep, I bet you will. And I said, that's great. Okay, so the deal here is that you, talking to the wife, cannot undermine him. Okay, so we're going to set the boundary in a minute, but you can't undermine him. So when your daughter comes to you and goes, oh, Daddy's really cross about my room, you can't say, oh, Daddy's really arsey about the room. Don't worry about it. Doesn't really matter. You have to say, really sorry, darling. Dad's in charge on this one. And you back away. So you have to be able, you might not agree, but you have to be able to work together. Because if you can't work together, then, and especially with teenagers, learn how to divide and separate. And the minute they learn how to divide and separate, what they're actually learning is that the rules don't really apply to me. And, you know, you don't have to look very far up the chain in terms of government and big organisations to see where that ultimately can lead to. So they need to know that actually a rule is a rule, and that there are consequences for breaking those rules. That is how society works. But we do it in a way that is, we're working together. The next thing you've got to decide is, in your head, well, what does a tidy room actually mean? Because your idea of a tidy room, your partner's idea of a tidy room, and your teen's idea of a tidy room, they might not even exist in the same model, in the same novel. So it could be, well, actually, what does that actually mean to you? And he said, well, it's basic stuff. It's like no food upstairs, no bottles or anything on the carpet, no clothes on the carpet, everything put away in the cupboard. So I said, okay, fine. So we now know where you sit, and she's not part of this process at the moment beyond agreeing to back you up. So, rules for setting boundaries. Make sure you can work together even if you don't agree on what should be happening. The next is you're going to invite your child into the process. So you say, you know what, this bedroom thing is really causing some drama, and I'm guessing that it's not much fun for you to seeing us arguing, and then for one of us getting cross with the other, and then Dad getting cross with you, and then you feeling upset and telling me, and me telling you off, Dad, and we're doing this triangle round and round and round. I can't imagine it's much of a laugh for you. So listen to understand, then invite them to give you solutions, you know. And be prepared to negotiate. So, well, Dad says that actually, you know, the bottom rule about the bedroom is that you can't have any bottles or food or anything on the floor, no clothes on the floor, everything has to be put away in the cupboard. Oh, that's ridiculous. I should be allowed to have a few clothes on a chair. Okay, right, well, let's see. And we go in to negotiate. So always know where your kind of end line is, and just recognize that, you know, young people, teenagers particularly, are kind of designed to push boundaries. It's what they need to do to be able to kind of get ready for adulthood. They've got to test their personal boundaries, and they've got to push against you, because their developmental drive is to find their identity and to start to separate a bit from the family. So they've got to push and test the boundaries. So once you've come up with what your boundary actually is, okay, so we've agreed that, you know, the boundary is, you know, that I have to be in by 9:48, whatever you've eventually agreed on. And being in means I've come in and I've, you know, talked to you, whatever it is, and I'm upstairs. So, okay, right, we've sorted it out. We've agreed 9:48. I started at 9:30. You started at 10. We've agreed at 9:48. We've negotiated. Once you've got that, the next part of it is you've got to ask them for a consequence. And because often this is the part that parents find really difficult, you know, I don't know what to do for a consequence, because, you know, if I take stuff away, you know, you get to that point where you know, when they're little, you can take their phones off them, and suddenly you're looking up at a kind of 17-year-old who towers over you, and you're going, give me that phone back, and you just end up looking completely ridiculous. So ask them for the consequences. And I generally think that consequences shouldn't be about taking stuff away. You know, if it's screen related, then the obvious consequences, right? Well, you've lost a bit of screen time next time that you're using it. If you want a screen contract, it's all in the Wellbeing Hub. Go in, type in screen contract, and it will all pop up for you. But you need to ask them, what's the consequence going to be if you break this boundary, if you get it wrong? Oh, God, I don't know. Well, if my room's not tidy, you know, I don't know, I'll clean 2 pairs of your shoes. Okay, right, that sounds like a really interesting start. So often getting them to take on chores rather than taking stuff away from them. I'll clean 2 pairs of your shoes, or I'll empty the dishwasher for the rest of the week, or I'll sort out the laundry, or, you know, there is a consequence for not doing it, because actually what's happened is you've used up my time, which means I have less time to go and do the things that I want to do. So the natural consequence in the adult world is you do something to make up for it. What are you going to do? Ask them for the consequence. Once you've got a consequence, and the consequence kind of needs to sting rather than hurting, it needs to inconvenience and sting rather than damage. Once you've got that consequence, make sure you write this whole thing down into a written contract, because there will come a time at some point where they break it, probably. And then, you know, you can just kind of pick up the piece of paper and go, gosh, I bet you wish you hadn't signed this right now. Well, you knew what the consequences were. Crack on and get it done. Once you've got it done, we can move on. Now, there are 2 more things to mention here. The first is, when you are setting a boundary like this, if I were you, I would do it at a time when you know they want something from you. So if, for example, they're going to want you to drive them to a party or an event or whatever, say, you know what, I know you really want to go to this event this evening, really super happy to take you there. We just need to sort this out first. If you can see the lid go up, yours or theirs, you need to walk away and give them a little bit of space in time for the lid to come down so that we can have a conversation. Oh, you're so arsy about it. I don't know why it's such a big drama. Why can't you just leave it? All my friends are allowed to do blah, 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 whatever it is. So give them a chance to kind of vent off and let that lid come back down, going, look, you know, I want you to go to this party. I'm really happy to give you a lift there, but I'm not prepared to do it until this is sorted. Because if we don't sort this out, we're going to carry on taking chips out of each other. And if we carry on taking chips out of each other, we're going to end up trashing our relationship. And frankly, I love you more than anything. I don't want that to happen for us, because that would be an absolute travesty. The second thing that, and usually when you put it like that, they're like, oh, okay, well, we'll sort it out. Now can I have a lift? Yeah, delighted to. Hop in the car. If at any point you are, either when you're setting the boundary, or if the consequence has been broken and they're refusing to do it, so the boundary's been broken and they're refusing to do the consequence, then you go into tactic number 2, which is, I'm really sorry, but right now service is off. The great thing about children and teenagers is they always want something. I can't do that for you until we've sorted this out. I'd be delighted to cook dinner for you once we've sorted this out. You can go and help yourself to what you can find, you know, in the kind of salad drawer of the fridge, but I'm not cooking for you until we have sorted this out. So that's what I mean. Try and make it at a time where you know there's something they want from you anyway, that they're invested. And services off is, I think it allows you to stay really calm. You know what? I'd be delighted to do that for you once we've sorted this out. In other words, this is really, really important to me and to us, because if we don't sort it out, we will trash our relationship. So there you go. First thing, close the lid. If at any point those lids start to flip, yours, theirs, whoever's, get out of the kitchen whilst the heat is on and come back to it later on when everybody's calm. State the problem and the impact. When you XXX, I feel Y, and we need to sort this out. What is it like from your perspective? What's going on for you? What do you think we need to do about this? I want you to help with the problem solving rather than me imposing a solution on you, because, you know, they're young, they're teenagers, they need to learn these processes. Okay, this one isn't really a boundary because it's only really happened once. You've made a mistake. It wasn't okay what happened, but I guess it was a mistake and it's not something that's happened before. So provided it doesn't happen again, let's just think through what would you do in the same situation or similar situation differently next time, and let's move on. If it's repeatedly causing drama, then we definitely need a boundary. You know how to set a boundary now. But also, is the boundary still appropriate? Because as they get older, you know, sometimes we have to be prepared to go back and to reevaluate and change boundaries so that they are appropriate for their maturity and also for their age. And lastly, you know, just give them a whole bunch of praise for actually involving themselves in the process, for getting on board, for talking with you, and for finding solutions to what are ultimately, you know, family problems right now, but they're problems that they're going to have to deal with throughout their lives, because as long as we are in relationship with other people, we have to, you know, we are from time to time going to get our buttons pushed. So these are amazing skills to learn really, really young, because they will help them as they go further forward through adult life. We've come to the end. If you haven't already signed up for your membership in the Wellbeing Hub, there's a little code that you can use. And yeah, I think the comments box is open. If anybody has got any questions that they want to ask, please feel free to put them into the comments box. I think I can stop sharing this now. Don't know, Natasha, are you there? Oh yes, there we go.
So we'll just leave it open just for a minute or so, just while I thank you. So thank you so much, Alicia. And I was just emailing Rebecca, who's a new member of your team, to say, can we have the parent carer webinar topics for next academic year? Because of course we will constantly welcome you back to share all your expertise. And I think from this webinar specifically, it's making it more conscious to us as community members, as parents and carers. I'm a parent and carer myself. So I've just got a question here from Mrs. Stitcher. So I'm just going to show it to you so you can see it, so I don't have to read it out. And I'll hand over to you, Alicia.
Okay, brilliant. Ooh. Can you give some examples of what triggers teenagers? Yes, absolutely. The teenage brain, the way the teenage brain is wired is they are particularly sensitive to any form of criticism, the threat of being excluded. So in other words, they are socially very, very sensitive. And that is because the teenage brain is a social brain. It's wired to be connecting to others outside of the family. So where they might be feel judged or criticized or potentially ostracized, that is going to push their buttons big time. So you kind of saying to your daughter as she comes down the stairs, oh my goodness, you look like a complete nutter, whatever, your skirt's too short, your top's too low, all of that kind of stuff, really personal. That's going to be really painful for them. If they're worried, the whole social media thing, part of the problem with that is because it really taps into their social anxiety, that I might be being left out, everybody else is having a lovely time and I'm not included. So that's really often what pushes teenagers' buttons. There are lots of other things. So for example, I think we often talk too much, we sort of, we're trying to get some information across to them. So we see a tiny window of opportunity and we jump in and make it into a lecture. That often pushes their buttons. So, let your mantra be kind of ask, don't tell. Oh, what do you think about this? Or what have you seen going on with that? Or what do you think we should do, etc., etc. So those are just a couple, but I'm sure there's loads more. We're just doing a webinar, which I don't know, maybe Forrest, some of your pupils might like to get involved in. And it's all what I wish my parents knew or understood. What I wish my parents knew or understood. It's totally anonymous, but it's really interesting because often what's coming out of there are some of the things that push their buttons. So great question. Thank you.
So what I'm going to ask, because I know, Alicia, we keep in contact, that if there are any questions, I know that you would be more than happy over time if there was any that came through. So please do, any listeners or post-webinar listeners, please do send them through to myself or your children's core team, tutor, head of house, or even to the senior school office. They will all land in the pastoral office's desk, and we can respond to you. So thank you so much once again. And I really appreciate, I know you're in between conferences, so I really do appreciate you fitting us in. And I know we'll hear much more from you in due course as a member of the Forest community. And what I'm going to do is, just before I highlight the QR code for feedback, I'll just put up one more time the Wellbeing Hub QR code. Please do, parents and carers and anyone listening, if you've got a login and you're members of our community, there's fantastic stuff. The A to Z of the Wellbeing Hub is just fantastic. So do travel back safe. I think you're heading back down to London. And thank you so much once again. And thank you so much to parents and carers. And we hope we see you on Wednesday, the 12th of June for our next webinar. Have a lovely evening all.
Bye. Thanks, Natasha.